I'm going to show you how to install a winch into the back of a JK. This JK here is a 2016. The winch I chose was a Warn Xenon 10S Platinum. The reason I decided to go with the Platinum is because it comes with a wireless remote. Now, because the winch is installed in the back of the Jeep, if you're off-roading, either mudding or rocking or whatever, and you've got something up underneath your Jeep that's blocking you or something, that limits your access to the bottom of the winch. Well, if you install the winch upside down, you won't be able to reach the clutch lever. The other option is to install it right side up, and now you've got to open the door to be able to reach in the back of the Jeep to operate that clutch lever on the winch. So with the Warn Xenon Platinum series, whether it's the 10,000 or the 12,000 pound, this one here is a 10,000 pound. It comes with a wireless clutch, and so you can see your clutch right here. Right now it's engaged, and so you've got several options here. You've got an option here for your clutch, two accessories, they can be lights or whatever. And so right now, if I try to release the clutch by hitting this center button, because that's the option I've got selected, so you can move along and select different options. And then this is the button you hit to enter. So if I try and release the clutch now, the cable is tight. If I try and release it, it won't release under load. You heard a little click, and so now you see I'm getting an error there. So the way to release this clutch on this winch is to release the winch, running it backwards. And so now my error is gone. I've got a little bit of slack in my line, but I've still got my clutch engaged. So now that if I want to release my clutch, I hit the button, you heard it disengage, and now I've got confirmation that my clutch is released. And so now I can pull the cable out. And so I didn't have to touch the winch at all to release my clutch. Now to go back in, all you need to do is, or to re-engage your clutch rather, all you need to do is hitting your in or your out button. So I'll pull the winch back in. Now one thing I recommend is that when you store the winch, while you're off-roading or traveling normally, to put your hook on top. And so now I'll draw my winch line tight. And so it's gonna hold, my hook's tight and it's up on top. And the reason for that is so that when you're off-roading and rocks or anything hit the bottom of your bumper, at least your rope or your cable is that much higher from getting damaged. One of the other things that I did was, this is a Warn Elite bumper, and so from here it used to go straight across. I'll show you an angle from the top. And so you can see where it's recessed in. The reason I recess it in is so that that Fairlead and that rope gets protected that much more. I just come back from Wolf Caves. If you're in Texas, Wolf Caves is up near Mason. If you've ever been to that park and you're familiar with it, we spent 3 days up there just this past Labor Day weekend, and we were doing mostly yellows and a few reds and some greens, of course. So just to show you what the kind of terrain I was going through, I was hitting, lots of places. I've got scratch marks here. I've got scratch marks all on the back of my bumper. There's a few right here. Even one hit right there, a rock hit there, but nothing hit my rope. I even got some rash there, but once again, my rope was protected. It was up out of the way. And so this is a normal length JK. It's a JKU, and this is a Warn Elite bumper. And so you can see where I was hitting. Now for the install of it, the reason I'm showing you that is that I've installed this winch without making the Jeep really any longer and without decreasing the ground clearance very much. So right here, I installed a piece of 3-inch channel. And so this bracket here is the Warn Elite bumper bracket that comes with the bumper that you got to bolt to the frame. And so there's a bolt right there. I used that bolt and it goes all the way across. And then there's another bolt there. So the reason for showing you and telling you about where I was wheeling and the scratches that I got is that technically I did reduce the ground clearance by about 1.5 inches right here. But you can see I hit there, got a real small scratch there, a real small scratch there, and probably that's the worst one, but still that's not bad at all. So for adding this winch on, I did lose a tiny bit of ground clearance, but it didn't really affect me much because I don't normally hit my Jeep that far in, to the wheels. It's normally further out on the back of the bumper. And so like I mentioned, you can see the back of the bumper where I scratched it all up. This plate here is 1/4 inch plate, And this 3-inch channel, they have 3 different sizes of channel in 3-inch, and so this is the heavier one. So if you're going to install this, I definitely recommend going with the heavier channel. This here is 1/4 inch. The reason I went with 1/4 inch is because that's pretty much what I see winch bumper manufacturers use. And now everything that I did to the frame to get all this in there, I'm going to show you now in the rest of the video. I'm pretty much showing you the finished product at the beginning of the video, and then I'll show you how I did it. It's obviously going to require a aftermarket exhaust, and so I have a Flowmaster exhaust, and this tip was all the way over here, but I had to cut some of the exhaust out here. I flared the end of this tip, and so then I put it back on and made it a lot shorter. I am going to have to modify it a little bit more, and I suspected that I would, because when the engine's under load or idling, you can hear that the exhaust hits that sway bar. I had pushed it up higher, but it keeps wanting to roll back down, so I may need to work on the clamp that's further up and tighten it up. But anyways, that's just a minor thing, no big deal there, something I'll have to work on. In the bottom here, I left a little opening so that I can look in there and inspect if I need to, inspect it for whatever reason, and also so some debris can fall out. If it gets wet, a little bit more ventilation so it can dry out a little faster. So going back to the remote, I mentioned that it has 2 options here for accessories. So if you look inside the Fairlead, it's hard to see in there, and sometimes you need to monitor your winch rope, make sure it's being spooled on properly and that you don't have any problems in there. And especially if you're going to be winching at night, you need to be able to see in there. So what I did was I installed 2 LED lights in there. One's on the bottom down here, you can't see it, but it's an LED light strip down there on the bottom. And then inside, up a little higher, there's another one that shines on top of the drum. And so what I'll do is I've got number 1 selected, and that's where I've got my LED lights wired. And so I'll hit that option now, and you see the light came on right there, turning it off and back on. So at night, you'll really be able to see your winch rope to make sure everything's spooled on there properly. So that's pretty much the finished product, and now I'll walk you through the actual installation of it. I have Googled this and I've looked on YouTube, and there's really not a lot of information out there as far as people doing this. I'm sure somebody's done it before. I'm going to try and do it with as few modifications as possible, but I can tell you now it's going to require some welding, it's going to require some cutting on the Jeep body and the Jeep frame. As far as the dimensions go, it's about 24.5 inches wide, so we'll call it 25. That way we've got a little bit of clearance on both sides. It's about 8 inches tall and about 7 inches deep. I do have the rear subwoofer in my Jeep, and I intend on keeping that subwoofer there. So there's a little area there where the factory jack is stored, and so that area there is going to have to get cut out, and that's what's going to make room for this winch. Now I've done as much measuring as I can, and I'm pretty sure it's going to fit, but ultimately I got to start cutting on the Jeep to see if it's actually going to fit. Some of the considerations to take into is that these are the power inlet for the winch, and so I've got to have room for this. There's also another cable here. This controls the winch also. I'm pretty sure this just controls the clutch function. So looking back at the back of my Jeep, I've got a Warn Elite bumper, and it is 8 inch thick, and somewhere in here I'm gonna have to cut in and install the Fairlead, and I'm gonna try and recess it a little bit. And so the reason for recessing it is so that when rocks or something while I'm traveling off-road doesn't hit the rope and cut the rope. I don't normally hit my rear bumper, but it definitely does happen sometimes. If you put the Fairlead all the way out here, then obviously you could potentially pull at a 90-degree angle if you need to. I'm just going to recess my winch and sacrifice that capability. That way I can protect my winch rope a little bit. Right up underneath here, this here is part of the rear of the Jeep frame, and that's going to have to get cut. I'm going to try and keep as much of it intact as possible, but some of the top part, about at least half of the top part of it, is going to have to get cut out, and then I'll reinforce it and box it back in and try and keep some of that strength there. Where the factory Jeep winch goes in this area here. This is the area that's going to have to get cut out. Here's my subwoofer. I fully intend on keeping this. There's very little room in between here so I couldn't necessarily try and, you know, make this compartment smaller and gain any room there. I thought about moving the entire subwoofer forward a little bit, but that would require cutting all the way around it and re-welding it back in there. And looking underneath the Jeep, there's just too much going on down there. There's too much suspension and the shock mounts and all kinds of other things in the way that I believe I can do this without doing that, and I really don't want to do that. That's going to be a lot of work. So here's the gasket for the door. I've already removed that, and then normally there's a plastic tray here. I've removed that also. This is a little latch that holds the carpet piece down, and so I'm going to try and keep this in place, because once that winch is in here, those battery or the power input post for the winch, they're going to go somewhere in here. That's where they're going to end up being. And so you can see my little mark right there. I think I'm going to end up cutting right here and keeping this here. That way it can continue to hold the carpet down. You probably won't be able to see it, but I'll tell you, and you'll be able to feel it on your Jeep if you attempt to do this modification. But this piece here is separate from this piece. It's two different pieces, and there's a seam weld right here. So I intend on cutting right along the bottom of the seam weld and keeping as much of this in place as possible. Where the back seal goes on right here. On the inside, there's another little piece right here. And so this piece and this outside piece is two different pieces. You can see the little seam right there. So I'm going to try and keep as much of this as possible. That way the door steel stays in place. And so I'm going to drop down. Looking on the outside, I can see right there and right there, there's some welds. And so I'm going to drop down below here, so that visually you don't see that anything's been cut. And so down below is going to have to get cut probably about here. I mean, on this piece, but about this deep down, and it'll get cut all the way across. And again, that's just on this inside storage compartment here. And so I've measured all this out, and I'm pretty sure it's going to fit. But like I mentioned, I'm at the point now to where I've just got to start cutting and see what I can do. I've looked at the winch. There's very little modifications that I can do to the winch itself to make the winch any smaller. There's a little bit of grinding here and there that I can do, but it's really just going to gain me 1/8 of an inch here and there. So there's not a whole lot I can do with that there. I've done a lot of thinking, and I'm at the point now where I got to start working. So I'll videotape it along the way, and I'm hoping it works out. The controls for the winch, you notice on the winch itself, I didn't have any controls. I took all the controls off. You're definitely going to have to do that. You're going to figure out where to mount the controls. But inside the Jeep, I've got these plastic boxes, and I also don't have the carpet in my Jeep. So I've got to figure out how to run the wires all the way from the front of the Jeep. I've got to run some cables all the way back. I'm probably going to go with 1/0 or 2/0. I got to do a little bit more research there, but it's at least going to be a 1/0 battery cable, and you'll have to run both of them, the positive and the negative. So that's some wire you're going to have to buy there, and so consider that expense if you attempt to do this. I'm going to see if I can take that control pack apart and install it underneath this plastic somewhere, or on this other side. I got to take them off. I know there's some room back there. I'm just not sure, or I don't recall how much room is back there. So I'm going to take these off and see which one looks like it's got the most room, and try and work with it. There's a little hump right here, so there's definitely some room underneath there. Actually, there's not. I can feel wires there, and the Jeep body goes up right there. So like I said, I'm going to figure out where I'm going to put those. So this is the control pack that I was just talking about, that I've got to find somewhere to put this in the back of the Jeep. It's got a little circuit board here. This has to go with it, or really all of it needs to go, stay together, or at least I've got to find somewhere to put all this. This plastic piece can go. These brass or copper bus bars rather, these can go. So what I'm going to have to do is make some new wires that'll go from these 3 points here, and then run those to the winch. And so this whole package, I can make it a lot smaller, but I've still got to find somewhere to put it. This contactor here, that's the biggest piece that I've got to find somewhere to mount. A lot of these wires, most likely I'm going to have to cut them and extend them, just so I can put the pieces somewhere and be able to make everything fit. On the other side here, which is really the back of the winch, normally there's a switch here, and then this 1 and 2, that's where you can wire up some wireless accessories that you can control with the winch remote. I'm probably not going to use those, but those are all part of it, and so they're going to have to stay. I can't really delete them. And right here, I'm going to have to extend this. And what that was that's where this connected. When this control pack here was bolted on top, this plugged into it. So this is going to control the wireless clutch. So I'm going to have to cut this plug off, extend all those wires so that it can reach to here wherever I end up putting all this. And so that's basically the summary of installing all this, and I'll walk you through the rest of it. So now looking underneath the Jeep, I kind of need a wider angle camera, but I'm just working with what I got here. You're gonna have to have an aftermarket exhaust. The one I have is a Flowmaster, and it dumps out over here. I got it off Amazon. I'm pretty happy with it. It definitely increases the sound a little bit. This area here, this is where that factory jack storage was. So this is what's going to get cut out, and so that winch is going to fill this entire space. And so this piece here, this is the rear of the Jeep frame. Somewhere in here I'm going to have to notch down and cut across like that and go back up, and so then I'll reinforce that back in there. I'm going to try and keep this bottom piece in there. I'm pretty sure so far what I've measured I'll be able to keep a little bit of it, but I know definitely I'm going to have to cut some of it out. And the reason I'm going to have to cut some of it out is because the Fairlead is going to have to be mounted over here somewhere where I showed you earlier, and so the rope on the winch spools in from the bottom. So that's why I've got to make room, really not for the winch itself, but for the rope to spool through, and so I've got to make room for that. Once this is cut out, then that whole winch should be able to fit up in there. And once I cut this out, I'm kind of committed, but that's what's really going to tell me whether that winch is going to fit in there or not. So this little plastic piece here, that's what holds down that carpet on top. I removed it just in case I need to, just to make sure that I don't damage it while I'm in there cutting. I think in this area here, I won't be able to cut from the inside. I'll have to cut from underneath the Jeep. So I don't want that saw blade to get up in there and damage this thing. So getting it out was kind of tricky. So there's these 4 little stainless steel little tabs right here. There's 2 on each side, and so when you shove it in there, they pop out, and then they hold on to the metal from the bottom side. So what I did was I stuck my iPhone in here with the front facing camera looking at it, and I had a flashlight right here putting some light in there. And so then I looked through this little hole right here so I could see the screen. That way I could see what I was doing. Otherwise, you can't get your head in there far enough to be able to see it. But when it's in there, what I did was, I'll just set it back in there just a little bit. So when it's sitting in there, what I did was reach to the back side first. Reach to this side over here first, and use your fingernails to pop those two. And so while you're doing that, while you're popping those two with your fingernail on the bottom side, you kind of got to be pulling up on this side, and when you feel them pop loose, pick up that little corner. When the other side pops loose, pick up that little corner. And it's going to take you a few minutes to kind of figure out what you're doing, because it wasn't exactly easy, but I was able to get it. So then once you've got these two out, it'll kind of sit there at an angle like that, and then get a long screwdriver. I got a little bitty one like this, standard screwdriver, a long one. And so then that's when you're going to use your phone. So look through this hole. Look at your screen, and while you're doing that, you'll be able to look at the screen and see where your screwdriver is, and then the flashlight's providing light. And so what you're going to want to do with your screwdriver, you're going to be holding this with one hand and operating the screwdriver with the other. And so then with the screwdriver, you're going to push on these 2 tabs, and then once those release, you'll do one at a time again, and you'll kind of cock it, and then do the other one, and then you'll be able to get it all the way out. Right now I'm not 100% sure that I needed to remove it, but I just wanted to make sure that it was out of the way, because I won't be cutting in there with a body saw, maybe the plasma cutter. I'm just not sure what I'm going to be able to fit up in there, but I don't know. I'm making this up as I go. So I got the bumper off now. I should have took the bumper off before I even started recording, but this is that piece that's going to have to get cut and notched somewhere in around here. Right here, you can see there's a little factory notch there. That's the center line pretty much. So from here, the winch is 25 inches wide, so I'll have to go 12 and a half each way basically. So pretty much this entire factory jack storage is going to get cut out, and so I'll probably cut somewhere along here. All right, I've nearly got this piece cut out. You can see there's barely anything holding on to it. So what I did was I found the center line, which, like I said, there's a little notch right here. So right in the center of that, I marked the center line of the rear frame support, and then I transfer that line up here. And then from up here to here, I measured down 2 3/4 and scribed the line all the way across. Now that 2 3/4, just guessing that for now. Hopefully it'll work. But like I mentioned, my bumper comes up a little higher, so I wanted it to look nice, and this factory bodywork go past the top of the bumper. So depending on the type of your bumper, the type of bumper you have, yours may be different. But I went with 2 3/4 for that Warren Elite bumper. In the corners, I drilled some circles just so it'd have a little radius there. Did the same thing on that side over here. On the inside, I was able to fit a drill on this side and also drill a hole over there. But over here where the exhaust is, I didn't feel like jacking with the exhaust, so I didn't bother with drilling a hole over there. Some of the tools that I used to cut this out was a body saw with a real fine tooth saw blade, and then a angle grinder with a cutting wheel on it. And this is a real thin 2-inch cutting wheel, and I've probably used about 5 of these things already. They're going pretty fast. The body saw did most of the work. Where I'm having to use the 90-degree grinder is up in here where it's real close. If you got a plasma cutter, I got one, and I didn't want to pull it out that way. I didn't have to deal with any burning. But I was able to get up in here with that 90-degree angle grinder and cut from. I started from over here, and I'm working my way this way. And so I'm about here right now, and I've only got well, actually I've got like 2 inches left right here that I need to cut. I've already done the other side, and then this middle piece from here to here, I was able to get that from the top side. So this is the top side, and so from here to here, I was able to get that with the body saw, just reaching in like this. All right, you can see I've got that piece cut out now, and I didn't cut any of the top part, this top stuff up here. I didn't cut any of that out yet. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to notch over here, like I said, for where the wires go. But right now I'm going to shove the winch up in there and kind of get an idea of what exactly I need to do there. And now's the moment of truth, whether it actually fits or not. Okay, so there it is. It fits, which I kind of knew it would, or I was pretty sure it would. I'd hate to have cut my Jeep up and then it not fit. But it fits up in there, and you can see the wood that it's setting on. The bottom of it is up above the bottom of this factory rear cross members. Kind of expected that. Like I mentioned, if you can see that post right there. So like I mentioned, I'm gonna have to cut out right here, but I'm gonna try and keep that little plastic tab in place that holds that carpet down over the rear subwoofer. So I'm just gonna figure out what I need to cut out right here, but I'm gonna cut out right here. That way those terminals are exposed, because I definitely don't want the body moving, because remember the body on the Jeep is actually going to move different from the frame a little bit. So I don't want the body moving and then these contacts shorting out on the body of the frame. So I'm definitely going to cut all that out. And like I mentioned, I cut a little wider than the winch. That way when the body's moving, it won't contact the winch. One concern I do have is the exhaust, which is right here. It's kind of close to the winch right here, and I knew that going in. Either I'll put a little heat shield there, or I'll modify the exhaust and have it dump a little bit closer to the rear axle back there. But for now, I'm just gonna run it like that, and I'll see how hot this winch gets from the exhaust being there and whether I think it's a problem or not. But that's what it looks like. Got a little bit of room over here also. And something I noticed, just speaking of the body moving, you can't see it here, but right there, the paint is cracked, and what has happened, if you can see that little dent right there, that's from me flexing off-road and the body actually hitting the frame. So that goes to show you just how much it does move. So I've dented that side, and you can see that side right there where that paint is chipped and the body's rusting now. So it's flexed and made contact there and damaged the body there also a little bit. So that's why you definitely need a little bit of gap all the way around your winch. That way you're not hitting anything. It's a little close here. I can fit my finger in there though. So, But all that will have to be fine-tuned with the mounting of it and getting it in just right. This is what it looks like underneath. So there's some room here, actually more than I expected. The widest part of the winch is right here, which is actually below the bottom of the subwoofer. So I was measuring this width here, and so right there it's 7 inches wide, but it starts to taper in at the top. So that actually gave me more room than I expected to have. I wasn't calculating that right, that this taper was actually what's going to be up in there. Here's the exhaust, what I was talking about. So if need be, I can modify it so I can take this tip and move the tip back here, which would still, I mean, if it's dumping here, it's that hot exhaust gas is still in this area, you know, and I'm talking about when I'm going slow off-road or doing a lot of idling. I'll just trial and error and see how it works out. And there's the other side. So far, it's looking pretty good. And now I'm going to start working on the channel iron going across. And then it's going to be 1/4-inch plate underneath here. That's what's ultimately going to hold the winch up. And so, like I said, that channel iron is what's going to be the backbone for that 10,000 pound pull, plus this also. So both of them are going to be bolted to that 1/4-inch plate. And you know, I wasn't sure what size plate to go with, but I've looked at other winch bumpers, and I've got a couple winch bumpers right here at home already, and I've looked at other winch bumpers, and 1/4-inch plates seems to be the norm for what manufacturers are using on their winch bumpers. So that's what I'm going to go with. So I've cut that little piece out now, and so you can see those 3 terminals. Now, I really don't know which way I'm going to go with my wires yet. If my 3 wires come this way, then I'll have room here to run them up over on this side of the Jeep. I may try and put the controls over here because this is the same side of the vehicle that the Jeep is on, or that the battery is on. So that take a little bit less wiring if I run the wires over there. If I got to go to the driver's side with the control pack, then I'll need to run my wires this way, and so I'll probably trim out a little bit more going this way and down here just to give these two a little bit more room right here. You can see it's kind of close right there if the wires were running that way towards the driver's side. So, but for now I'm going to leave it like this, and but I may have to come back and trim a little bit out here. And so if you're doing this, just depending on which way you run your wires, it may be a little bit different for you. So going back to the winch drum and the factory Jeep rear cross member for the frame. The bottom of the spool is almost pretty much level with the top of the rear cross member. So remember the winch rope goes in and it spools onto the bottom of the drum as the drum spins, I guess backwards if you want to call it that way. It spools on from the bottom. So where I was talking about having to notch it, the only reason I needed to notch it is for the rope to get through here. If I put my Fairlead up higher, then I could technically go over this, but then I'd have to put the Fairlead further back over here. So hold on a second, let me get the Fairlead. If I put my Fairlead closer to the body of the Jeep, you see the body here, if I put my Fairlead closer to the body of the Jeep, then the rope won't touch the rear cross member, but now it's gonna have to make a real hard angle down as that drum gets bigger. Now when the drum doesn't have very much winch line on it, it's not going to be very much of an angle, but as that drum gets bigger, then it's going to be a lot more of an angle. And so that's why I'm thinking I'm going to lower the Fairlead down and notch this so that as that drum fills up, and you remember, you can see how big the drum is, usually the rope will almost fill up the drum, so it's going to be pretty big. So you can imagine it's going to be about that big in there. And so when that drum is full, I still want that line to be, you know, pretty straight going in there. And so what I'm planning on doing, I've looked at my other winches on my other vehicles, and the way they're set up, in the front of my Jeep, I've got a 9.5 CTI with the Warn Elite winch, or the Warn Elite bumper rather. And so I took all of the winch line off, and what I noticed the way Warn manufactured it is when the winch is bolted on, the top of the Fairlead right here is flush with the bottom of the drum when the drum is empty. So as that line is being spooled on, that rope is just going straight in, touching the top. And then as that spool gets bigger on the drum, then the rope starts to move down, and then eventually it's rubbing on the bottom. So that's basically what I want to replicate here. And so that's why I'm going to try and have this down to where the top of the Fairlead is about where the top of the rear factory cross member ultimately used to be, because I'm going to cut that out, and so then this is going to end up being around here somewhere. So now I got to mount the Fairlead. I'm not going to bolt it directly to the bumper itself. I could kind of put it like that, but this part of the bumper right here actually slopes downwards, so the Fairlead wouldn't be straight. I guess it could work like that, but I'm going to try and, if you can see these lines right here, I've kind of draw it out a little bit. There's a line right there. It's kind of hard to see. There's a line right there, but I'm going to try and recess it in a little bit so that the outside of the Fairlead here, this outside is kind of flush with the back of the bumper. Again, I'm trying to not make the Jeep any longer than it already is. And then I'll have to recess up here on top a little bit, and then mount it. Ultimately, it's going to be mounted to this tube steel back here that I'll weld it into the rear cross member. So I got the bumper notched up like I said I was going to do it. This is the tube steel here. You can see the winch in there. And so you notice I got these notches right here on both sides. And what those are for is this Fairlead is going to bolt up there. You can see I've got the metal already broke over, and the Fairlead bolted to the metal. And so what I've got on the back is some pieces of heavy wall pipe. I threaded the inside and basically made a nut out of it on both sides. And so those round pieces of pipe are going to go inside those notches, and I'm going to weld them in there. So what I'm going to do is hold it in place exactly where it needs to be, and then I'll tack the primered plate, that gray plate right there that the Fairlead's bolted to, and then I'll go behind it and I'll tack those little pipes to that tube steel, and then I'll remove the Fairlead and I'll weld it all out, remove the bumper and weld it out also. So that's what it's going to look like. One more thing, you notice that the Warren logo sticks up above the back of the bumper a little bit. There's nothing I could really do about that. You could buy a different Fairlead, one that doesn't have the Warren logo, but I'm just going to go with the one I've got now, and I'll probably put a little hump right there in the bumper just so that it matches the little hump of the logo. All right, I've disassembled it, and I read the instructions to see what the switch was. You know, of course, you wait till the very end to read the instructions. But this switch here is the wireless activation, and they recommend you turn it off when you're not going to use it for extended period of time. So I'm actually going to have to mount this switch somewhere where I can get to it. This little plastic piece was bolted to the front of it, so I've started to take it apart, and that's about as much as I can get apart right there. I can't separate the switch from this part here without cutting it, so I'm going to cut the switch off. That way I can mount this somewhere else. And then I think I found a place to mount all this behind the rear tail light, or actually in front of the rear tail light rather. There's a storage, or there's a compartment in there. And then also on this little bottom trailer looking connector, this 4-prong connector, this is actually for the wireless clutch. Earlier I had mentioned it might have been for the temperature, but it's just for the wireless clutch. So I removed the rear tail light on the passenger side, and you can see there's quite a big void in there. This is the tail light wire, and then that other wire in there is from a CB antenna. So I've got some room in there, and that's where I'm going to try to mount that control pack, that contactor, and then maybe that other little wire, that other little circuit board in there. And then I'm going to cut that switch off and find somewhere else to mount it. I made this little aluminum bracket to hold this contactor on. It's going to go in the rear tail light housing that I showed you already. So I've got most of it mocked up now, and right now the bumper isn't bolted on obviously, but I've got the Fairlead on, and I've got it set up to where the top of the Fairlead is flush with the bottom of the drum. Now as the spool gets bigger, you know, or as the rope winds on, then the rope will kind of be moving downward towards the bottom of the Fairlead, assuming that it's going straight in, which almost never happens. But I was looking at my front winch bumper, which is also a Warren, and I've got a 9.5 CTI on the front, and so I was looking how they had it set up, and so that's kind of what I did in the back also. Now from past experience, normally when I'm using the winch, or you know, at least when I'm in a position where I need to winch somebody else or winch myself out, normally the winch line is going down. So I think most of the use is going to be on this bottom part of the Fairlead. I don't think I'll ever be pulling up very much. So what I'm gonna do now is add another piece of iron across the top, because I added this 1/2 inch tube steel here all the way across, but there's nothing that's gonna really keep it from wanting to bend down. If I got a big load here, you know, pulling down, I don't want it to bend downward like that. I've got strength as far as straight back, but nothing that's gonna keep it from bending down. So the next piece that I'm gonna add is another 3-inch piece of channel iron, and I've already got it cut, but I'm gonna put it right there. So and I'm gonna weld it here on both sides, and I'm gonna weld it here onto the 1/2 inch tube steel. I left a little bit down here. You can see it goes down a little bit, but the bottom of this here, as far as in reference to the Fairlead is about 1 inch difference. So the rope should never ever hit it. The only way the rope would ever hit it is if somebody holds the button too long, and then the winch goes all the way backwards and starts spooling on from the top, and then it's going to cut it right here, which that shouldn't happen. So that's the next piece that I'm going to add, and so that's going to strengthen it as far as it being pulled down and bending, and this right here bending in. I don't know if it ever happened, but I just don't want to have to worry about it. And as far as my back bumper goes, you can see I got a little notch right here, and so that back bumper comes in right here, and then it comes up and then goes in like that. So this will be just underneath the rear bumper. This is the back bumper, and so I modified it right here to recess the Fairlead in a little bit, because sometimes when I'm rock crawling I hit the bottom of the bumper, so I wanted the Fairlead recessed a little bit so it doesn't get hit, because I'm using synthetic rope, so I don't want it to get cut. This is a finished mount with the winch mounted. I'm about to put it underneath the Jeep, but just to give you a look at what it looks like before. These two holes are going to mount to that 1/2 inch tube steel that I added to the back. The tube steel is threaded, so 1/2 inch bolts will go there. These two smaller ones on the outside are 3/8. And when I had the rear cross member open, I reached down inside there and I welded some nuts on, so those will also thread into the rear cross member to those nuts I welded on. This here will mount onto the frame on both sides. This bolt also holds the worn bumper bracket on. Also extended the clutch control cable, so I cut that end off of the winch. That it was only about 8 inches long. I cut that end off, so I've got a splice in here, and then I extended the wires. I got heat shrink all the way, and then I've got some splices in here also, heat shrinked all the way. So this is what the back of the Jeep looks like now, just before I'm about to install the winch. So those holes that I was talking about just now, them 4 holes, 2 are going to thread there, and then there's 1 on each side inside the Jeep cross member where I welded those nuts on the inside. That'll also thread it from the bottom side. This is the 3/8 channel that I added to the top of it just to give it strength on top. Fairlead's going to mount here. I got the LED installed. It's a 6-inch submersible LED. I went with the bolt-on style. These 2 bolts right here are what's bolting it on. It's right underneath here. I've drilled right here, and the wire comes through the middle of it. The reason I went with the bolt-on style, that way adhesive, you know, if those LED strips that you can get real cheap on Amazon and other places that are adhesive backed, I just don't want it coming loose in a few years and then I'm having to drop this entire winch to replace it. So I went with the bolt-on style. It's a waterproof. I got it from a boating place, and so the wire comes up through the middle, and I'm running it along here. This wire here is the clutch wire, and so it's going to run up the right hand side, both of them right here. And this is the wireless control pack, and so the clutch plugs in here, and then I'm going to put an end on this LED wire, and so it's going to plug into one of these. I've also got this switch here. This turns on the wireless control module. I talked about it earlier. What I'm planning to do is run this up front so I can control it from the front. The contactor I've installed inside the rear tail light housing, and I'll show that a little bit.